Welcome, everyone. My name is Chaya Kessler, and I'm the Director of Jewish Studies at Kent State University. And it is my pleasure to welcome you again to our series of Jews Around the World, the Emerging Scholars series that both Youngstown State University and Kent State University are collaborating on. This is the last of this series, and it is my pleasure to do this program together with Dr. Jacob Labenz, who is the director of the Judaic and Holocaust Center. I did it right? No?
Center for Judaic
and Holocaust Studies at YSU. So welcome, everyone. Jacob will do a little introduction. I hope you follow us in the future when we have other events coming up. There will be something in the chat speaking about other events. Also, if the way we do it, you are muted, but you have a voice. You can put it in the chat or in the Q&A below, and we'll get back to it after the program, which is promising to be amazing. Jacob.
Great. So thank you very much, Chaya. It's been a pleasure collaborating with you on this program and getting to hear fantastic talks, two already this semester. Tonight, I'm going to introduce our guest in a moment. But before I do, I just want to call your attention to a few talks and a few upcoming events at Youngstown State University through the Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies. I'll put a link to these events in the chat so that we have a lot of stuff going on. But we're here tonight for something else. We're here tonight to hear from Dr. Elly Moseson give a talk called Protecting House and Hearth, Jewish Domestic Magic in Pre-Modern Europe. So before Dr. Moseson starts, let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Elly Moseson is currently the Workman's Circle, Dr. Emmanuel Pat Visiting Professor in Eastern European Jewish Studies at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. He received his PhD in Religious Studies from the Graduate Division of Religious Studies at Boston University in September 2017. His dissertation, From Spoken Word to the Discourse of the Academy, Reading the Sources for the Teachings of the Besht, concerned the intellectual legacy of the purported founder of Hasidism, Israel Baal Shem Tov, also known as the Besht. His current research project at YIVO, Magic and Folk Medicine in Eastern European Jewish Culture, explores the nexus between written sources and ethnographical reports pertaining to the magical beliefs and practices of the pre-modern Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. So we are delighted to have Dr. Moseson here to round out our Emerging Scholars Lecture Series. And without further ado, I give you Dr. Moseson.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Chaya. And I would also like to thank the Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies at Youngstown State University and the Jewish Studies program at Kent State University for this opportunity to share some of my research with you today. Today, I would like to share with you some of my research on the magical beliefs and practices of the Jewish communities in pre-modern Europe. Before I proceed, I should note that magic is a notoriously problematic term. It is difficult, if not impossible, to clearly differentiate it from religion on the one hand and from science on the other. Moreover, it has often been used polemically to designate practices that for one reason or another was deemed illegitimate by the powers that be. In other words, what we do is religion or science, but what they do is magic. I use it here largely heuristically and for lack of a better alternative to refer to practices that aim to directly affect the natural order by supernatural means. Magical beliefs and practices were ubiquitous in pre-modern societies and permeated nearly every aspect of everyday life. With few practical means of confronting the often harsh conditions of existence, people frequently turned to magic to assuage their anxieties and fulfill their desires. Magical practices offered hope and a measure of agency even in the most hopeless of situations. Jewish societies were no exception. Despite occasional criticism, Jews engaged in a great variety of magical practices throughout the ages. While the Bible condemns certain magical practices, such condemnation remained rather vague and left much room for interpretation and exceptions. In any event, injunctions are not always followed, and we know that Israelites in the biblical period did, in fact, engage in a variety of magical practices. Indeed, the Bible itself describes some of its protagonists as having done so, most famously perhaps in the episode of the Witch of Endor, whom King Saul requests to summon the spirit of the dead prophet Samuel. The prevalence of magic during the biblical period is further highlighted by the Ketef Hinnom amulets, the earliest known written artifacts containing biblical text. These two silver amulets are dated to the 6th century BC, that is, to the end of the First Temple era, and contain texts that parallel the priestly blessing recorded in Numbers 6:24 to 26. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. The evidence for Jewish magical practices increases significantly as we move on to later periods in Jewish history. Indeed, from late antiquity until the modern period, Jews not only engaged in magical practices, but even gained a reputation as especially knowledgeable in this area. Magic was to a large extent an oral tradition, shared among families and communities and passed down from generation to generation through instruction and imitation. Since Jews and their non-Jewish neighbors share the same general beliefs about the nature and efficacy of magic, they engage in a continual exchange of magic lore. The contents of these oral traditions often went back to prehistoric times, but were continuously supplemented with new material as they became available. Over the centuries, a parallel written tradition developed, which both drew on and contributed to the ongoing oral tradition. In the Jewish case, the existence of books of magic can be traced to late antiquity, while thousands of manuscript collections containing magical recipes and rituals survived from the medieval period and early modern periods, some of which began to be printed from the late 17th century and on. Given the ubiquity of magic, most people could and likely did engage in some magical practices as the occasion arose and as their knowledge of oral or written traditions permitted. However, when they lacked the requisite knowledge, or when some practice they tried failed or was thought to be too dangerous, then they might consult an expert, someone with a reputation as particularly knowledgeable or powerful, to undertake or assist in the performance of the desired ritual. In Europe, such expert magicians were known under the various titles such as wizard, soothsayer, cunning man, or wise woman. In the Jewish tradition, they were often designated by the title Baal Shem, that is, master of the name, in reference to the sacred names of God that they employed in their amulets and incantations. In the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a marked increase in the number of such professional Baal Shem, who served as magicians and healers throughout the Jewish communities of both Eastern and Western Europe. The most famous of these, perhaps, was Israel Baal Shem Tov, known as the Besht, the figure traditionally considered to be the founder of the Hasidic movement. Scholars have noted that although Jewish women were largely excluded from participating in normative religious rituals, they did at times develop independent forms of religious expression. One ritual specifically practiced by women was known as Knetlach Legen, laying wicks, or Kever Mesten, measuring the graves, which involved circling the cemetery or the graves of one's ancestors with string, and using the string to make candles that were then lit in the synagogue for Yom Kippur. While this practice has generally been presented as an expression of devotional piety, the magical literature also preserves very similar rituals, but with plainly magical goals. For example, many sources describe the performance of this ritual not before Yom Kippur, but on the occasion of an illness in the family. Other sources recommend using the melted wax to create male and female figurines, which are then to be buried under the woman's bed to assist in childbearing. These variations suggest that the laying of wicks before Yom Kippur was part of a much broader ritual complex with a strong magical character. The role of women in the transmission and performance of magic is also attested to in magical recipe collections, where women are cited as informants and practitioners, as well as in memoirs and ethnographical studies of the 19th and 20th centuries. Midwives, whose practice straddled the border between folk medicine and magic, often functioned as wise women and were considered particularly expert in the knowledge and performance of certain magical rituals. It is interesting to note that Israel Baal Shem Tov's mother, Sarah, was a midwife, and he himself was known in his early years as Israel, the midwife's son. We should therefore consider the possibility that the best mother played a role in her son's choice of a career, or at least served as a source for his medical magical knowledge. Magic, and especially magic relating to the home and domestic life, the focus of our talk today, was one of the few cultural spheres in which Jewish women could conduct their own rituals and attain significant social status for their knowledge and expertise. In traditional societies, the home was viewed as a place of shelter, affording protection not only from the elements and from potential adversaries, but also from a host of malevolent spirits and powers believed to be responsible for disease and misfortune. Since the physical structure of the house could not fully guarantee protection from any of these threats, a great variety of magical practices were employed to reinforce the home against them. Existing openings in the structure of the house, like doors, windows, and chimneys, were considered especially vulnerable and were particular targets of magical protection efforts. Such efforts included amulets or inscriptions of powerful names of God, angels, or demons, various objects that for one reason or another were attributed apotropaic power, or the performance of more or less elaborate rituals meant to repel danger from or attract protection to the house and grant its inhabitants prosperity and good fortune. In this picture of a non-Jewish home near Salzburg in Austria, taken around the year 1900, we see a range of magical devices for protecting the home, including sacred symbols inscribed on the door, a wreath of St. John's wort hung on it, and an image of a regional Madonna nailed to the lintel. Extant sources suggest that Jewish homes might have been adorned in a similar manner. In this 19th century drawing of a Jewish home, we see, in addition to the mezuzah on the doorpost, an inscription on the lintel of Deuteronomy 28:6. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. More explicitly magical examples can be found in the magical literature, as for example, this important 15th century collection, which recommends the following in the name of a 13th century rabbi. To protect the house from Rabbi Menachem Chazan of London, carve with a knife the following holy names on the lintel, and the entire house and all that is in it will be saved during a time of active danger. End quote. However, Jewish rituals were often viewed with suspicion by their neighbors, and Jewish apotropaic objects, and inscriptions may well have been less visually prominent than those on Christian homes. In addition to being the object of magical protection efforts, the home itself was a location in which magical rituals and procedures for a vast range of purposes were conducted, from healing illness to increasing wealth and from attracting love to cursing enemies. Such practices often transformed the home into a kind of magical space. A vivid example of this kind of transformation can be seen in the magical protective measures deployed in Jewish homes during childbirth. It was extremely common, and in fact still is among many traditional Jews, to hang amulets on the walls of the room where a woman was lying in order to protect the mother and child from misfortune, and especially from the harmful intentions of the demoness Lilith, who was believed to harm newborn children. A very popular version of such an amulet, consisting of a series of figures accompanied by magical names and the phrase Adam, Eve, Lilith out, was printed in 1701 in the magical collection Sefer Riziel HaMalach. In this illustration from the early 18th century, depicting Jewish customs and practices surrounding childbirth, we see a woman giving birth with a variety of protective measures in place. Versions of the above amulet against Lilith are hung on the walls of the room, and a Torah scroll, which due to its great sanctity served as a protective talisman, is placed on the table. Finally, in addition to the prayer vigils depicted in the final scene, we see a sword or dagger placed in the woman's bed, another measure that was believed to protect mother and child from harm. Such practices, and many more are described in the magical literature, created a magically protected and protecting space within one's home for the duration of this perilous life event. As mentioned, certain structural elements in the house were seen as vulnerable and were a particular focus of protective rituals. However, nearly every conceivable part of the house could become the location or an element in a magic ritual, whether for protecting the home or for some entirely different purpose. We thus find recipes that make mention of specific places within the house or elements of its structure, including the center of the house, under the bed, the chimney, the hearth, the space in front of the hearth, the cellar, the attic, the roof, the central beams, windows, walls, floors, corners, vestibules, various doorways, thresholds, lintels, doorposts, doors, doorknobs, hinges, locks, keys, the yard, the gate around the yard. Indeed, even bits of the house itself or substances directly connected to it were often used, such as dirt or pebbles from under the threshold or from corners of the rooms, pieces of the walls or of the plaster covering it, chips from the doors or doorways, shingles from the roof or weeds growing on it, moss from the walls or spider webs from behind the door. And it was not just parts of the house that were used, but a great deal of ordinary household items as well. Brooms, axes, tables, stools, beds, knives, pots, plates, bowls, glasses, sieves, pestles, a range of food items, rope, thread, needles, nails, awls, rags, various items of clothing, shoes, coins, candles, fire shovels, and coals from the hearth. As these far from exhaustive lists suggest, magic permeated every aspect of the house, its structure, its spaces, and the everyday objects within it. Such elements, moreover, were not simply incidental to the rituals, but were integral to their symbolic meaning and perceived efficacy. The house could thus be either the object of a magic ritual or an element in the ritual itself, and often, though not always, they were both at the same time. I would like to turn now to some specific examples of house protection rituals, and especially those undertaken upon building or moving into a new house. In many cultures, the construction of a new structure was considered a dangerous undertaking that required special rites of protection and propitiation of malevolent forces before commencing to build or to inhabit the structure. Such consecration rites typically involved the sacrifice, if not of a human being, then of an animal substitute, which was often buried in the foundation of the structure or under the threshold. In the Bible, we find specific requirements connected with building a new house. In Deuteronomy 22:8, we read, "When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it." While the intent of this verse is to warn against criminal negligence and is not connected to any magical beliefs or practices, as we shall see, in later periods, this verse was given magical meaning and incorporated into house protection rituals. The Bible, however, does describe consecration rites that were conducted upon the completion of the building of the tabernacles and of the first and second temples, a central component of which was a sacrifice of large numbers of animals. Although consecration sacrifices for private homes are not mentioned in the Bible, we do find a description of a magical ritual for protecting the home, the Passover sacrifice performed by the Israelites in Egypt. As we read in Exodus 12:22-23, "Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home." The most ubiquitous Jewish practice traditionally connected with protecting the house, however, is the mezuzah, consisting of a parchment scroll containing two biblical passages that included the injunction, "And thou shalt write them upon the doorposts of thy house and upon thy gates." By the rabbinic period, the mezuzah had come to be viewed as a sort of amulet that protected the house from all manner of harm, a view that has persisted to this day. Indeed, in the medieval period, it was common to add many magical formulae consisting of divine and angelic names and magical symbols to the mezuzah scroll itself in order to enhance its apotropaic powers. Another magical procedure for protecting the home that was popular among Jews in Mesopotamia between the 4th and 8th centuries was the use of magic bowls as a kind of demon trap. These bowls contained Aramaic incantations written in spirals around the inside or outside of the bowl, often with a crudely drawn image of a demon at the center, and were buried upside down under the threshold or placed in the corners of the house. Later in the medieval period, we begin to find much more explicit discussions of taboos and anxieties around building a new house. The early 13th century document known as the Testament of Rabbi Judah the Pious, attributed to the Ashkenazi pietist Judah ben Samuel of Regensburg, and composed of a series of customs and taboos relating to a range of human endeavors and experiences, we read the following. A person should not build a house of stone, but should rather purchase one. If he did build one, he should not remain in it long, for either he or his children will die. He should rather sell it to someone else. Regarding a house of wood, the matter remains unclear. A person should not build a house on land upon which there had never before been a structure. If he does not wish to leave it empty, then he should not live in it during the first year. A person should not stop up a window or door completely so that the demons will not harm it, for they are wont to exit through them. He should therefore leave a small hole in them. While the reasons for these restrictions are not elaborated, they appear to reflect a general anxiety over perturbing local spirits who might take revenge against the human inhabitants infringing upon their territory. In another work attributed to Judah ben Samuel, Sefer Hasidim, a collection of Ashkenazi custom, piety, and lore, we find further restrictions relating to the building of a house. There are matters that are considered to be ways of the Amorites, and this is a rabbinic term for forbidden magical practice, but are nevertheless permitted. For example, if someone tears down an old house and builds a new one in the same place, or he builds a new room, the inhabitants should take care not to alter the original placement of the doors and windows, but should aim to make the new exactly like the old. Otherwise, they endanger their lives due to the demons and angels appointed there. Here too, the taboo is connected with the fear of disturbing local spirits from the designated spaces. Elsewhere in the Sefer Hasidim, the idea that building a new house on uninhabited land was dangerous because it infringed upon the territory of local spirits is made explicit, and a special ritual is recommended to counter this danger. When people decide to erect houses in the forest, this will result in a plague among the inhabitants because such a place is designated for demons, and since it had not been used regularly before then, people will die. They asked the sage what to do, and he said that they should choose the plot of land and measure its 4 sides and place rope around it and take 10 people and a Torah scroll. And here the text goes on to describe a procession they're to undertake over the entire plot while reciting passages from the Bible. At the close, they should say, by the consent of the omnipresent, and by the consent of the Torah, and by the consent of the people of Israel who keep it, no harmful male or female spirit may be permitted to enter this place from now on and forever, end quote. These medieval sources show that new construction projects were associated with beliefs about local spirits and their power to harm people, as well as the need for special rituals that would expel these spirits and protect future inhabitants from their wrath. Such beliefs and practices persisted into the early modern period, and we find many iterations of them in the collections of magical recipes that survived from this period. One of the largest and richest of such collections was compiled in the middle of the 18th century under the title Sefer HaCheshek by a figure known as Hillel Baal Shem. In addition to recording many protection rituals and spells, Hillel preserves rare testimony regarding the actual implementation of these practices and the manner in which they were transmitted among the Jewish communities of Europe. Thus, in one passage, he presents an otherwise unknown taboo relating to the construction of a house that he learned from a rather unusual source. There are new and old houses whose inhabitants have no physical or financial well-being, and they become unhealthy and weak, and they experience continual mishap due to evil spirits or sorcery or some evil person. This is all caused by the central beam of the room, which supports all the others. The builders install it in the following manner, either with intentional malevolence or by an unintentional error in their work. They place the thicker part of the beam facing the person entering the room, and the thinner part of the wood they place above the door. But just like a tree grows in the forest, with the thicker part coming out of the ground from below and the thinner part rising above, this is how it should be placed during the construction of a house. And if the direction of growth is reversed, as can happen when there is no recognizable difference, and as a consequence of manufacture, both ends are of equal size, then all goodness in this house will be upturned, and the inhabitants will have no rest and life at all, and they will experience physical and financial mishap to the point that they will be eradicated and uprooted from this house, heaven forbid. This I heard and received from a great builder who was engaged in building synagogues and other large and tall buildings, and he is a distinguished member of the holy community of Ruzhani. I subsequently searched through holy books and found in the book Sefer HaCheshek, and this is a different book with the same title, in possession of the great elderly rabbi, the pious preacher and great Kabbalist, our master Rabbi Ephraim, the preacher of the holy community of Reshev. And there are various procedures to expel this with God's help by means of holy names and impure names and other remedies that were revealed by King Asmodeus to King Solomon, end quote. Here, Hillel records a taboo relating to the placement of the central beam of the house that he had learned from a craftsman from the town of Ruzhani who habitually undertook such construction projects. Here you can see the 18th century synagogue in nearby Grodno, on which this builder might conceivably have worked, though we really don't know. Scholars have noted that builders and carpenters often had special knowledge of magical beliefs and practices relating to their particular craft, and would at times engage in performing them as well. Our text vividly confirms this special knowledge of builders and illustrates how a professional Baal Shem like Hillel might learn new and valuable information from such craftsmen. Indeed, as he notes, such knowledge enabled builders to not only protect houses and their inhabitants, but also to harm them, a fact that likely included them with other magical practitioners as objects of both esteem and suspicion among the general population. Hillel further notes that he searched for additional information on the topic and succeeded in discovering relevant lore in a manuscript that was in the possession of Ephraim of Reshev. Ephraim was the rabbi of the community of Wertheim and a well-known Baal Shem, who in 1728 published a book in Yiddish of magical and medical remedies under the title Shar Ephraim. Hillel did not record what he had found in Ephraim's manuscript and have been unable to identify it among the surviving manuscript collections. However, another manuscript from the period does record a charm to expel demons from a house that is described as having been revealed to King Solomon by Asmodeus, the king of demons. It involves placing in the house grass that had been left unburned by chance during an intentional fire set by farmers to improve their fields. Whether or not this is in fact identical to the material discovered by Hillel in Ephraim's manuscript, it is clear that he valued the new oral tradition that he had received from the builder of Ruzhani and tried to integrate it into the existing written magical tradition. Further insight into Hillel's sources and his attitude toward them can be gleaned from his introductory words to a particular amulet he described. This amulet is good for protection against fire and sorcery and mishaps, and it should be placed in the central beam of the room. Bore a hole about the size of a finger with an awl, and place the amulet in it, wrapped like a mezuzah, and then stop up the hole with a small piece of wood. I found it so in the holy community of Tiraspol, near the holy community of Brest-Litovsk, in the central beam among the ruins of the house of Rabbi Joseph Egels. And I tried and tested it successfully in a number of places, end quote. In other words, Hillel is here sharing something that he discovered almost like a modern archaeologist in situ among the ruins of the house of a respected member of the Jewish community. He describes its preparation and placement, notes his own subsequent employment of amulets based on this model, and confirms their efficacy. We thus learn that magical lore was not only transmitted orally or by means of written sources, but also through material remains, a fact that has not been sufficiently appreciated by researchers. In addition to requiring proper building and consecration, a house might at times become possessed by demons and require an exorcism rite that was typically performed by a Baal Shem or other expert. A vivid account of such an event is recorded in the book Kav HaYashar, a hugely popular ethical work by Tzvi Hirsch Kaidenover, first published in 1705. We heard about an event that took place in our times, and I will tell you how it happened. In the year 1681 or 1682, there was a stone house that stood in the main street in the holy community of Poznan, and the cellar in the house was sealed off so that nobody could enter. One day, a boy entered the cellar, and after a quarter of an hour, the residents of the house found him lying dead at the door to the cellar, and nobody knew the cause of his death. Some 2 years later, after the death of the boy, the evil spirits entered the vestibule of the owner, and when the residents were preparing to cook food on the stove, they would find in their food and in their pots dirt and ashes, so that it was no longer edible. The power of the evil spirits then increased so that they now came into the house where the people lived, and they would take the vessels and candle holders that adorned the room and throw them to the ground, but they did not harm any of the residents. Then the evil spirits entered all of the rooms of the house, so that the people were terrified and were forced to leave and move to another house. This caused great consternation in the holy community of Poznan, and the communal leaders gathered to discuss what to do and how to proceed. They recruited priests, known as Jesuits, to perform their operations, but they were unable to exorcise the evil spirits. Then they sent a special envoy to the famous Baal Shem, called Rabbi Joel Baal Shem, of the holy community of Zamość. And as soon as Rabbi Joel arrived, he began to adjure them to reveal to him why they had come to this house, which is an abode of humans, since the evil spirits have no permission to reside in settled areas, but only in a place of filth or in the desert. The evil spirits replied that according to the laws of the Torah, this house belonged entirely to them, and they agreed to be heard by the court of justice of the holy community of Poznan. The text goes on to relate that the spirits argued before the court that a previous owner of the house had had a sexual relationship with a demoness, and that they were the offspring she bore him, and were therefore the legitimate heirs to the property. The court ruled against them, however, and Joel Baal Shem succeeded in banishing them from the house. While Tzvi Hirsch's primary aim in recording the story was to warn his readers against sexual sin, it vividly portrays the prevailing beliefs in the ability of demons to invade the home and torment its inhabitants. It further indicates that such cases required professional help, which in this case included Jesuit priests, a powerful Baal Shem, and the local rabbinical court. Indeed, we have a first-hand account of the performance of an exorcism by the above-mentioned Baal Shem, Ephraim of Reshef. In a manuscript collection of magical recipes compiled by Ephraim himself, we read, quote, remedies and adjurations to expel the evil spirits from a house that I pronounced in the village of Yeluge, and I expelled the evil spirits from the house of the dear notable Mr. Joshua on the 17th of Tammuz, 1715, and it has also been tested for extracting treasure. The adjuration must be done on Saturday night, immediately following the Havdalah ceremony. First, you must make a circle while reciting the adjuration, and you should make 3 such circles. And here the text continues with a series of incantations to be recited as part of the ritual. As mentioned, the purported founder of the Hasidic movement, Israel Baal Shem Tov, was a practicing Baal Shem, and there is considerable evidence that he too was especially sought after for his magical expertise relating to building, protecting, and exorcising houses. For example, according to one source, the Besht is said to have warned against using partially burned wood in constructing a house, while another source preserves an amulet that he recommended to hang over the doorway to protect the home from misfortune. One of the most important sources for the Besht life and his activities as a Baal Shem is the hagiographical collection Shifrei HaBesht, compiled sometime in the 1790s by Dov Ber of Linitz and first printed in 1814. In addition to containing several accounts of the best exercising houses, this text also describes how the Besht was once invited to the Lithuanian town of Slutsk by the wife of Samuel Itzkowitz, one of the wealthiest Jews in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, expressly to perform a consecration ritual for a new stone house they had built. The details of the ritual he performed there was not recorded, but it is interesting to note that an independent account of this visit mentions that at one point he slaughtered a calf on the threshold of the house. The Besht's particular expertise in this area is further highlighted by the fact that the most elaborate ritual, or rather series of rituals, for protecting a new house that I have encountered is explicitly attributed to him. This extraordinary text, found in a large manuscript collection of magical recipes compiled at the end of the 18th century, vividly illustrates the kinds of magical practices we have been discussing. Protection for a house from Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Take the holy names written on the margins of this page and place them at every doorway of the house. The names written on the side, place on the same side of the doorway, and the names written above, place above the doorway. In other words, at its head, along with some salt and a slice of bread. And do not complete the building in under a year from the day you begin, but you are permitted to live in it during that year. 40 days before you move into the house, take specifically a black rooster and a black hen and place them in the house for 40 days. During these 40 days, you should say, I hereby transfer this house to these fowl from the abyss of the earth up to the sky, along with all exits and entrances, and I have no rights to it. Any claimant should approach them directly. And they should be watched for 40 days so that they are not lost. And if they are lost, you should take others. And if they are lost after the 40 days, that is no matter, but you may never slaughter them. And if they are, then you should give them something to eat and throw before them a small silver coin and say, I hereby lease the house from them for 7 years. Then take the coin from before them and go together with your wife to the river, and you should stand with your backs to it and throw the coin backwards into the river and say, we give this coin to the evil spirits so that they not have any sovereignty over the house, just like the biblical scapegoat. Then take a pack of needles and count out 9 times 9. Place each 9 down separately, and then, when you finish counting, mix them all together. The uncounted remainder discard in a place where people do not go. Then take an awl and make holes in the frames of the doors and windows of the house. These holes should be made without forethought. You should fill the holes with the needles similarly without forethought, but randomly, with the heads of the needles in the hole and the points facing out. And you should recite the biblical chapter about the commandment to make a fence around the roof and say, I hereby make an iron fence so that the evil spirits will have no sovereignty over this house. And the remaining needles you can discard wherever you wish. After this, and before you enter the house, take small jars and place in each one a bit of quicksilver. Seal it with wax and bury it under the threshold of each doorway of the house and under the 4 corners of the house. And while you bury them, recite 7 times Psalm 90:17, which begins, and let the graciousness of the Lord, as well as Psalm 127, which begins, a song of ascents of Solomon, except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it, also 7 times. And each day for the entire year, you should recite Psalm 90:17, and let the graciousness of the Lord, before sunrise, and envisage encircling the house and your household to protect them from all manner of evil eye, and all illness, and all suffering, and all mishap, and all injury, and poverty, and scarcity, and oppression. And when you place the amulets in the doorway, place them at the top third, opposite the mezuzah, and seal it with aspen wood. Many of the elements of these rituals are rooted in both Jewish and non-Jewish traditions that predate the Besht, and we shouldn't assume that any of them originated with him. However, it appears that his reputation and authority ensured their popularity, and various versions of these rituals circulated both orally and in writing among later Hasidic communities. For example, in the margins of a manuscript containing an only recently published work by Judah Leib of Linitz, the son of Dov Bera Linitz, the compiler of Shifrei HaBesht, we find an alternate version of these same protection rituals presented as having been received, quote, from Rabbi Joseph of Kamenka, who received it from the Besht. Other versions of these rituals are found attributed to a variety of Hasidic figures in later sources. Indeed, the centrality of magic we find in the life and career of the Besht was maintained within the Hasidic movement that developed in his wake. Many Hasidic leaders incorporated the function of Baal Shem into their roles as tzaddikim, the saintly leaders of Hasidic communities, and frequently dispensed magical rituals and procedures to their followers. The nature and extent of this ongoing engagement with magic and with the consecration rituals in particular are vividly illustrated by two letters by important Hasidic leaders dated from 1809, one by Abraham Joshua Heschel of Apta, and the other by Israel, the Maggid or preacher of Koznitz. Both letters were addressed to Yechiel Michal, a wealthy and learned member of the Jewish community of Yassi, and concerned his desire for a son and his anxiety over building a new house. In the first letter, Abraham Joshua informs Yechiel Michal that he had discussed his concerns with the Maggid of Koznitz, that he should go ahead with the construction of the new house, and that he will personally instruct him on how to perform a consecration ritual upon its completion. In his own letter, the Maggid of Koznitz conveys to Yechiel Michal a blessing for his son and mentions an accompanying amulet that would help him with this. He then instructs him in a consecration ritual for this house, for his new house, which turns out to be a variant of the same ritual we found attributed to the Besht. Quote, when God willing, you do complete the house, keep a rooster and hen in the house perpetually. And if they die, take others. And if one of them dies, take a mate for the other. And place a pot under every threshold, and each pot place 7 needles and some quicksilver. And also under the bedding of your wife, place such a pot. The Maggid also mentioned that he is sending along some amber for him to burn, and further instructs him to inform the fowl used in the ritual that he, the Maggid of Koznitz, commands them to serve as an expiation and a charm. The magical beliefs and practices prevalent among pre-modern Jews derived from a very different set of sources than the ritual practices codified in the Halakha, the body of normative Jewish law, and remained open to the free incorporation and creative development of a seemingly endless variety of ritual practices. Indeed, magical law functioned and was transmitted largely independently of halachic literature, where they are addressed only rarely. One such instance of halachic discussion of magical practices sheds light on our particular topic, as well as on the tensions and interactions between religious norms and magical practices. In 1815, Moseson, one of the foremost halachic authorities of the 19th century, received an inquiry from someone soliciting his opinion regarding the taboos surrounding the building of a new house recorded in the Testament of Rabbi Judah the Pious, as well as on the ritual of slaughtering a pair of fowl before moving in, a practice that appeared to the writer to fall under the category of forbidden magic. In his reply, Moses largely dismissed the need to be concerned over these taboos and suggested that it would be preferable to inaugurate the home with prayer and sacred study. However, he did not expressly forbid the performance of the magic ritual and compared it to the ancient kaparot, or atonement ritual performed before Yom Kippur. In other words, from a halachic perspective, such beliefs and practices were not obligatory, but neither were they forbidden. Moses himself is known to have engaged in a range of magical activities, and his somewhat critical stance here should probably be understood as an attempt to preserve the autonomy and integrity of the halachic tradition, rather than as anti-magical in principle. It is also worth noting that when in 1841 this responsum was published as part of his responsa collection Khatam Sofer, it marked the first time the ritual involving the pair of fowl appeared in print, a striking illustration of the complex interactions between magical and halachic traditions, and how halachic authority could serve to promote certain magical practices even as it criticized them. Rituals and procedures for protecting the home continued to be performed by Jews into the 20th century, and indeed they persist in some Jewish communities to this day. The ancient pan-European practice of bringing salt and grain into a new home is still quite prevalent among some ultra-Orthodox Jews, as are the use of as is the use of amulets for various purposes. For example, this picture of the early 20th century Hasidic figure, Isaiah of Kerestir, which is believed to protect the home against mice. Or this 19th century amulet, originally employed to protect the house against smallpox, measles, and scarlet fever, but recently recommended against coronavirus. As we have seen, the pre-modern home was a space intimately bound up with a wide range of magical beliefs and practices. It was the locus for a great deal of magical activity in general, as well as of special efforts designed to protect it from all manner of physical and metaphysical harm. Such practices were part of the everyday experience of ordinary people, though some individuals attained reputations as experts in magical lore and were consulted when the occasion arose. Such experts included both men and women, both Jews and Gentiles, and both rabbis and craftsmen. Magical knowledge was transmitted over many generations through oral transmission in various forms and genres of writing, and even through the transmission of objects and material remains. Magic, and especially domestic magic, can be considered one of the richest and most creative forms of Jewish cultural expression, and the study of its history and practice offers unique insight not only into the beliefs, practices, and experiences of the Jewish communities of the past, but those of our own day as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Moseson, for a very rich and evocative talk, which for me at least has really expanded in some small way my view into Jewish cultures, rituals, and ideas, and sort of the life world, the intellectual and lived experience of Jews in early modern Europe, and has raised tremendous amounts of questions and curiosities for me. I want to give the first opportunity, of course, to our participants to ask any questions. You may write them into the Q&A section or into the chat. As we wait for a question, I will note that based upon the recommendation of another scholar, I have that COVID amulet on my office door at home. So that was nice to see that in this talk.
There's a comment in that says these rules of building and organizing houses sort of reminds me of a feng shui. So it's interesting that there's the positioning of the columns and how facing the doors, and so that kind of this is from Rachel Farber, that it appears in other cultures as well, that particular aspect.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Dr. Farber of Oscar, sorry, is a colleague here at YSU. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reasoning behind the practices are different, though they may kind of share a similar psychology. But that's, yeah, an interesting parallel.
So the first question we received was from James Green. James writes, I sense a liveliness of hearts and minds for whom life in a household must entail a dreadful condition to be thought of as being dead from the neck up. I'm not sure James, if you could elaborate on that in the questions. I'm not sure I understand that. Elly, do you want to field this, or do you want to wait for an elaboration?
It would help to have an elaboration, although if the comment is about the way people perceived life as rather harsh and as filled with dangers that needed to be taken into account constantly, I think that was the case, and I think these traditions make that very clear. Life, in the pre-modern period, life was very difficult, and death was around the corner for everybody, very, very close at hand, and infant mortality rate was very high. So these were real anxieties, and if they believed that spirits are threatening them through their houses or other means, then they would take steps to try to counter that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll close with this. Just to the elaboration provided was assuming too much of ordinary existence during periods of relative calm. That is to say, I think what you just said, an imagination or a belief that there's a lot more going on beyond what one can perceive in the world, accounting for perhaps these stressors, these dangers.
Yes, anything can become involved in such a anxiety. Any aspect of your experience can be attributed to some unseen force. And then there are these endless recommendations for trying to deal with them or appease them or somehow bring them to your side.
So Jack Zions says, fascinating talk. Are these your translations of Sefer HaCheshek? Any thoughts on a full translation?
Yes, these are my translations. There are some other bits that have been translated by scholars out there, but it's a very large work, and I don't have the means to undertake that project, but it would be a worthwhile project to do, definitely.
Alex Infante asks, in your research, have you found any evidence of using gematria or magic numbers used for protection?
Yes, that is certainly it. Well, gematria is a kind of way of symbolically relating various ideas or words or things like that. So it does play a role in sometimes generating sacred names. And you do have magic squares of various sorts used in amulets or other protection rituals. So definitely, yeah.
Jack also says, this is a very Ashkenazi focused. Any thoughts on how these house consecration and project traditions compare to Sephardi traditions?
It's a very good question. My knowledge of Sephardic magical practice is very limited, largely because I don't know Judeo-Arabic, which is the language in which a lot of it was written, and it kind of in the way Ashkenazic traditions really are very similar and absorbed a lot from just local European traditions. The Arabic, the Sephardic tradition and Eastern Jewish tradition absorbed a lot from local Muslim magical tradition, which is an incredibly rich and complicated tradition, which I don't have mastery over, and I don't know. I know they definitely use amulets, and of course the famous Hamsa, the hand, as a protection for the house and other instances. But in terms of the kind of consecration rituals that we saw, say, from the excerpt from the Besht, I haven't seen anything specific. But again, especially beginning in the 19th century, there's a lot of crossover. I mean, even in the medieval period, there was crossover, but that increases over the last couple of centuries, where there's a lot of Ashkenazic practices that are adopted in Sephardic communities.
That relates, I suppose, to the next question by Dominic Pizzuolo. Pardon me for not pronouncing your name correctly. In your research, has these traditions of the home stayed consistent throughout the world in Jewish culture, or do they have variations in different corners of the world? So it's a related question.
Yeah, no, there must have been great variations in different locations and different villages, different families. These things are very local often. So what I've been doing, I've been trying to piece together what I can find, which is, of course, just a very, very small amount of information relative to to what was out there and what was being transmitted orally and so on. And we see variations over time, right? For example, the Babylonian magic bowls that we mentioned was for a long period, hundreds of years, but then it just ceased, and for the most part, and stopped being practiced. And there's a lot of speculation about how it got started and where and who was responsible for developing it. So you have new types of practices springing up. You have some of them dying out for various reasons. Dislocation. So much of these practices were lost in the early 20th century. The Second World War, of course, pretty much the entire Jewish population of Europe was dislocated. But even beforehand, World War I really kind of broke this kind of oral tradition even before the Second World War.
So let me intervene for a second and take the prerogative here to ask a question of my own, because how do you as a scholar go and hunt this down? I saw that these manuscripts are kept, some of them in Russia, some of them or were in Russia at some point. How do you go and hunt for these in what must be vast libraries, not organized around magic?
Yeah, well, cataloging helps. So, and especially the National Library of Israel's catalog, and its new online catalog, Ketiv, which is focused on manuscripts and tries to include all Hebrew manuscripts in the world, at least list them even, and in the last decade, most of them, I would say, have been made available digitally. And so that has been a huge boon for scholars. And so it's hunting through. Sometimes they're labeled magic, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you find references in secondary literature from 100 years ago to some obscure, and you hunt it down and you try to find it. It's difficult but exciting, and with these, especially with manuscripts in general, you never know what you're going to find. It's really, and it has hardly been looked at, so it's exciting.
The other question from Alex is, do you believe the Kabbalah tree of life diagram contains hidden insight to the secrets of meaning of life? And not anything deep or.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm an expert on the meaning of life, so I don't think I can really express my opinion on that.
Good answer. So from my colleague here at YSU, Rachel Farber-Ovaska, how do modern scholars differentiate between cultural practices, superstitions, religious customs, and what might be called magical practices?
That is a excellent and very difficult problem. And scholars today, question a lot of these terms, including magic, including mysticism, and even religion, and they see it as our understanding of them as something that developed over time and is used today kind of heuristically, like I was trying to do with the term magic, as a way to point to certain kind of regions of phenomena or experience in order to be able to speak about them, because you need some sort of term. But at the same time, they always obscure at this while they're pointing, because human experience is messy. It doesn't fit categories like that. So there's always going to be kind of deep intertwinement between magic and religion, and historically that has been the case, and in Jewish tradition that has certainly been what was happening. So what I try to do is I use a kind of definition about magic as kind of geared toward practical aims, while religion is usually thought of as kind of devotional or kind of worship of God, although prayer is an interesting kind of in between. Now, what is prayer? And you have in religious traditions, they struggle with this. How do we understand prayer? Is it praise? Is it petitioning God? Is it something about the exact words? Is it kind of like a magical incantation? And you have a range of opinions on that, and there's no clear answer. So I don't have an answer to the problem, but I think it's a fascinating question, and also one that somebody working on these traditions must keep in mind at all times.
When you were reading some of those texts and referring to different things in the house, it came to mind the fact that now in Israel, there are those a myriad of a variety of house protection incantation, like everybody has this house protection of the house, protection of the business, protection, and you can buy them in the marketplace in Jerusalem, and they are both in English and in Hebrew, and some of them are in Aramaic, and so I wonder if at the end of next century, or somebody will be looking at them and saying, "Hey, what happened here? How did we get here from there?" What do you think about that? But there's a large variety of those protections for the home.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's part of this history. And like I suggested, it's something that's of contemporary relevance as well. Many people believe in magic, practice magic in one form or another, but even people who don't, such practices are psychologically powerful. You have a nice blessing on your wall in your home. So what is it? A blessing? Is it just a nice piece of art?
Yeah.
Does it make you feel safer? You don't have to really claim to believe in magic to find some value in it. And I think a lot of people have some sort of sense that a positive message or some sacred object does have some sort of magical effect, even if they wouldn't admit it in those terms.
Yeah, some of them are not just the words, but there's like hanging, like the
Symbol.
garlic and all these other, right? So that
Yes.
garlic, of course, that's obvious.
Yes, against witches and demons. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Jacob, do you want to read the next?
Yes, once I unmute myself. So this comes from James Green. Might Ashkenazi Jews be thought of as being latecomers to modern town life in comparison to Sephardim, who came to relocate from Spain and settle in places like Venice and Amsterdam?
It's difficult to say, although certainly there were great Spanish Portuguese communities in Northern Europe and in Venice and other parts of the Atlantic. And they tended to be very cosmopolitan, very much acculturated to European culture, as opposed to Ashkenazic Jews at the time. But it's hard to, I wouldn't generalize from that and speak about all Sephardic Jews. There are many different experiences. Jews in the Ottoman Empire were certainly different than, say, Spanish Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam. And Ashkenazim, many Ashkenazic Jews had similar experiences, increasing perhaps slightly later, but not much later.
I had a question for you. You mentioned, and it just sort of, that they reached out to Jesuits.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I mean, there's one thing of, this is our magic, right? So you're not supposed to do magic. There's a taboo, but this doesn't count as the taboo. There's quite another to do their magic, right?
Yeah.
And the stories that I hear, right, often involve some risk of working with Gentile authorities, Christian authorities, right? A fear of going to Christian courts, or at least a rabbinic injunction. And here we see recourse at really a dire moment, a really important moment of not only political but spiritual consequence. They're reaching out to Jesuits, whose job in many who have been known to have been part of a missionary role in society. So what does that mean? How do they get there to Jesuits, and what's the role of the Jesuits in coming to the Jews? Are they not worried that they'll invoke Jesus?
It's an excellent question. I would be fascinating to see what the actual. I imagine they invoke Jesus in their attempt to drive out the demons from that particular house. And we know of. I mean, there are quite a number of references of Jews frequenting Tartars, Gypsies, local Gentile sorceresses. Rabbis often, frowned upon it and said, "Why don't you go to the saints, the Jewish saints? Why?" But and as you say, these come at moments of despair or trouble, and people are desperate. And if there's somebody in the village who has a reputation of being able to do something, people are gonna try it. They're gonna try whatever they could. It didn't work, so they had to call in an expert from far away. Zamosh to Poznan is not particularly close, although I don't know where he was at the time. But people would try whatever they could, and that's the thing about magical traditions. They like always saw in this series of protection rituals for the new house. One is not enough. You do 6 of them. 6 different things, because you want to make sure that you're covered. At least that's how I understand it. But it must have, it was. It must have had some tension. But again, I think the desperation of people's situations kind of led them to disregard that.
Right, because I would almost imagine that it could be a different text if the Jesuits made it worse, right? Then it's a warning, but it doesn't seem at all dangerous.
Right. And what would have happened if it had worked? Then what would the Jews have said?
Right.
So it couldn't work.
Thank you. They'd probably just say thank you and just move on. But it's interesting.
In Israel, what's happening now, that many people are going to seek the help of Chachamim, the wise men, and it's mostly the Sephardi, not the Ashkenazi. I mean, not the wise people. The Chachamim are usually from Morocco or from another Sephardi community, but everybody goes to them, not just Sephardi. I'm just anybody, like you said, anybody who has a problem, and then if you hear about somebody who can do, like, help women get pregnant or do something for the business, and they do, and they go and just like with many Ashkenazim also to the Rebbe, the Uman, the Orthodox. So
you have people who are seen as saints or holy people or experts. They've studied these magical handbooks. They have experience. They have the kind of authority to perform these rituals, and people go. And it's not just Sephardic. It's common among Ashkenazic Jews, Hasidic.
Right.
People go to their rebbes, and they also go to Sephardic Chacham and vice versa. And there are sometimes lesser well-known people that gain a reputation for being powerful in one way or another, and they attract people. Because life is still, we're not in the pre-modern period, but life is still often very challenging, and people are often in very trying and desperate situations. And like I said, it gives hope, and you can, it's hard to know if it's a good thing or not, but if it gives somebody hope when they would otherwise be in utter despair, perhaps it is good. I don't know.
Positive, yeah. Yeah, there is a comment in from Alex. I'm grateful for being able to experience this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Very insightful and helpful to my own research. So I don't know who Alex is, but
Thank you.
he's
Thank
doing
you.
some research in.
Curious to know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if there's, Jacob, there's no more questions or comments.
No, so in that case, thank you very much once again, Dr. Moseson. It was really a fascinating conversation and a wonderful discussion afterwards, really rich and I think engaging, and it's a really wonderful way to end our Emerging Scholars Lecture Series for this year. Hopefully something will continue next year as well. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet you. We didn't know each other before this, so thank you for that. Thank you, Chaya, as well, for all of this collaboration. I think we're able to do some wonderful things. And I'll let Chaya close it out, but I'm going to put, for those of you who are left, the link to our activities, upcoming events one last time in the chat so you can find it.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this journey of various communities around the world. This was really fascinating, and it opens up all this other space for thinking about possible, where do I go now? You know, I could use some magic or incantation of sorts. Yes. So anyway, and I think the world could really, like, look at where we are. You wake up in the morning, there's Ukraine, there's Israel, and now there's Brooklyn. So anyway, on a positive note, I wish everybody who celebrates Pesach a happy and kosher Pesach, and those who celebrate Easter, and those who celebrate Ramadan, everybody, this should be a good year. Celebration is always good. So thank you, Jacob, for really a wonderful idea and this experience of emerging scholars. And I really do look forward to continuing our discussion.
So if you, I'll have to say one more thing. If the idea originated with Eva Mrochek at UC Davis, and she helped us construct our idea for this plan. So I want to give credit where credit is due. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Moses, and again, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure to share this with you all. And thank you, Chaya and Jacob, for making it a wonderful event.
Thank you.